This week on the podcast, Limahl. Now, we all know Too Shy by Kajagoogoo, and we probably know that Limahl was fired from the band, but came back with Giorgio Moroder with Never Ending Story. Now, his career has been going for over 40 years, and as they say, you can't put a good man down. He's still going, and this interview will give you some real insights into his life. Limahl, welcome. It's really good to see you. And I must say, you're looking great.
Well, thank you. Maintenance. Never-ending maintenance.
I think part of the maintenance is probably that you're having, a really nice and well-deserved success at the moment. How does that feel?
It depends how you measure success, Steve. There's 45,000 YouTube views and there's 20,000 plus streams. Financially, that represents nothing. In the old days, if that was sales of records, that would be great. Putting a project together costs quite a bit of money. Sorry, is it really boring to talk about money?
No.
Let's let other musicians know how real it is. Yes, you can put out a record. You could be one of the thousands that puts out a new track, loads up a new track to a streaming site, and you announce it on your socials, and you get a few streams, and that's that. Ultimately, I think that will not be satisfying enough for most people. So if you're an X name like myself, you hire a PR company, you hire a radio plugger. I've hired a PR company in America as well, and I hired a new radio sort of plugging format thing, because in America anyway, it's impossible to get onto the mainstream radio. It's all very controlled and takes a lot of money. I'm talking hundreds, $100,000 plus in America. You probably know that, but there've been many books written about it and web pages out there about it. So my last three singles, so two in 2020, the pandemic year when we all had a lot of time, and then this 5-year gap to do this cover. I'll probably spend in the region of £50,000 with the productions and the videos, trying to do really good quality stuff that's not a DIY thing, there's a lot of DIY projects out there, I sort of call them. And it feels a little bit frustrating. So the reviews are great, the feedback is great. I hope it leads to something more positive. Otherwise, it's a bit, I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall a little bit. I don't know. Maybe I'm expecting too much. I don't know.
Well, I think we look upon success a lot differently when we're older, don't we? And actually, small things that work well are a success. So I think it's just nice, and I'm really pleased for you. So I really want to get to the fact that when I was young and I'd listen to music, it was an escape for me. It was an escape from my family. It sort of provided another world, a world where I felt I could belong. What was music for you when you were very young?
Totally the same. My family were very poor. I was raised on a council estate in Wigan. I had to, when I got to that sort of age, 12, 13, 14, the only way to get money to spend on myself was to go out and work. So I used to deliver bread, and you had to get up at 4 a.m. for that. There's a big bread factory in Wigan called Rathbones Bread. And it's quite funny this. I used to get to the, 4:30 I'd arrive, and as you approached this factory, Rathbones Bread Factory, they made pies as well. So the first thing, I would always get the smell of the meat and potato pies, and guess what I had for breakfast? And I've loved pies ever since. So the money from the bread work, which was hard work, you know, be out till like noon delivering bread to shops. So it was like wholesale, but great fun. And, you know, great to get out of the house, so to speak. Then
Yeah,
I was the usual delivering newspapers or doing local gardening. Then I'd save my 35p or whatever it was, 50p, go down to the independent record store. I always remember I was so excited going in there. What single am I going to buy? And I'm looking at the charts. I was so excited. And my dad used to say to me, but you've worked so hard for that money and you've just, all you've done is you've bought a record with it. He just didn't get it.
I mean, the reason I ask that is because also when I was 13, and you know, it's always a classic gay story that Bowie came on TV. I saw Bowie, and suddenly there was this person where I thought I could belong to this crowd because I didn't belong in my own existence. And I know there's always mirrors, and it's definitely when I've read your story, there are many mirrors to my story. My father was absent, he was emotional, I'm sure he was an alcoholic, you know, and you had a really tough childhood.
Yeah, it was competitive with the two brothers. Although, you know, I probably kept me sane because we would do all the things that three young brothers do together. So it would be Monopoly, darts, and snooker. So I'm quite good at snooker if you want a game sometime. And I know people who get really bored watching the snooker championships on TV, but if it's on, because I know the skill involved, especially on the full-size tables, it's phenomenal. Yeah, it's a real skill. And it's exciting. And of course, they're under pressure with all the people in the audience and the pressure on themselves. Did you sleep the night before? It's just like gigging, really. Oh, I'm laughing at my own jokes. Um, but yeah, it was tough, you know. It could have been better, could have been worse. I relate to the Bowie story that you just mentioned because with me, it was kind of Bowie, and then much more, it was the band Japan. I'll tell you what happened. I was driving past Hammersmith Odeon or cycling past or whatever it was around 1980. I'm not sure I'd met Kajagoogoo then. Probably hadn't. I was about to. And I saw this crowd of really artsy people outside of the venue. And I just thought, wow, look at those guys, you know, male and female, incredibly artistic. And I wanted to belong. I thought that that's my crowd, you know. Later on, when I got a job at the Embassy Club in Bond Street, a lot of that crowd did come there. I felt very much at home there. It was, you know, um, it was wild. It was, it's unsomething. I'm trying to think what word I want to use. Uncensored, you know. It was just you could be what you want to be, and that's why people came down there. It's almost like the door policy was the more avant-garde you, a bit like Steve Strange's Blitz Club door policy. You know, the more avant-garde and artsy you were, then you're front of the queue and even VIP'd in, which is fantastic.
No, I remember going there. I mean, I don't know if you want to go there with this question, so to say if you don't, but my father never showed any love to me. And I believe that the reason I ended up on MTV was because I was looking for compensation, the love of everyone to compensate his love. And I just wondered if the relationship with your father was something that, in effect, and it seems a weird thing to say, but it's in effect that relationship is bad, but in effect gives you the drive for success. It pushes you.
The negative and the positive, absolutely. Well, it wasn't just at home with my dad for me, it was also at school. I was bullied, I was different, never got picked for sports. Probably if I could watch a film back, I wasn't the most masculine kid in the world for a guy, you know, because I wanted to do art and literature and architecture and things like that, and everybody else was discussing rugby and stuff like that. And I didn't really know that I had inclinations until about being gay until 14 or 15. Then certain things started to happen, and it was like finding something very exciting, really, that I couldn't tell anyone. It was like my fantastic secret because it did make me feel so nice. And similarly, when I first went to a gay bar in Bolton at the age of 17, I was probably too young to get in, but you know, they turned a blind eye. I mean, the fuss that was made of me, and suddenly I felt very special. It was fantastic. Whereas for years I'd been the outcast at school and the outcast at home. My dad, I used to get mad because I always thought my dad doted on my older brother Tony. He did, you know, he did. And but you see, my mum made up for it. My mum gave me the love that was missing. I've always had an amazing bond with my mum. I still have, bless her. She's 87 now. I remember when I came out to my mum, I said, "Mum, I've got something to tell you." You know, that I was in the kitchen. I can picture the scene vividly and clearly. It's one of those moments in your life that you don't forget. Mum, I've got something to tell you. I think I'm gay. Maybe that was softening the blow. I think I'm gay. And she looked at me and smiled and she said, "It doesn't make any difference to me." And I had a pretty good idea anyway. She made light of it. The first thing I said was, "Don't tell my dad, you know, he'll kill me." Because, you know, everything growing up was so negative about anyone who might be queer. It was very negative. It was a hard time, you know, to realize that you're one of them, that they all say is really bad.
Well, that's why someone like Bowie was so important, I think, because Bowie was, you know, he was the alien, he was the outsider, and we were outsiders. So I think that's where the connection, and also in pop music's full of outsiders. You know, it's almost like de rigueur to be an outsider in pop music, to be able to create something different and also create a place where other people can belong.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's weird because, you know, my mother has since said to me, "I'm so glad you're gay," you know, because she's got three straight kids anyway, and none of them take her to the theatre. Well, maybe my sister would, because my sister, this is what happened. My sister came down to stay with me for 2 weeks in 1983, and she'd broken up with her boyfriend, Smithy, his name was, and she said, and she came for a 2 week holiday to sort of help get over him, and she never went back. And I was recording at Utopia Recording Studios in Primrose Hill. And she came round there to see me. And Annie, the manageress, said to Caroline, "Are you any good on a typewriter and the telephone?" My sister said, "Yes, of course." She said, "Oh, well, I need a new receptionist. Do you want the job?" And a week later, my sister was meeting Mick Jagger and Sting was coming in and all these other people. So my sister stayed in the south and she lives about half an hour from me. I'm in Hertfordshire. So we're, you know, it's quite nice to have a little bit of my family closer. And yeah, she'd take my mum to the theatre, but probably not as much as me.
Did you have a mentor when you were young, either well, probably not at school because you said it was a very difficult time, but you went to a repertory company, didn't you? So I just wonder whether you had some form of mentor who provided more of the sort of idea of a father figure and a guide to you.
Gosh. Um, I mean, you know, when you're 18 with a baby face and you're new in London, I definitely met people who wanted to help me, you know, and I guess in the same way that, you know, any community helps their own, whether it's, you know, the Chinese community or the Italian community or the Black community or the Jewish community or the gay community. So I definitely got help or pointed in the right direction from, you know, people around me that I met along the way. And it was just brilliant, you know, and that was nice because, you know, I'm in London, a long way from Wigan. I'm certainly not getting any help from anyone up there. There was no nepotism. Nobody in my household was in the music business or the entertainment business. So, I mean, the Embassy Club played a key role, and I was really excited to be in London. I had this dream, and I think people enjoyed being around me because I just gave a positive energy. It's weird because sometimes when I go into, I was only a waiter. I say only, no disrespect to other waiters, but you know, I'm a waiter at this nightclub, and I forgot what I was going to say now.
Going to those clubs that were really trendy and cool back then, anybody who worked there wasn't just a waiter, they were sort of a star because they were part of the club.
Well, you know, the Embassy Club has its own wiki page, which I find intriguing. And when Stephen Hayter died, the exuberant entrepreneurial manager frontman of this extraordinary club, he got a double page spread in one of the tabloids. It's probably the News of the World or something, because, you know, there's lots of scandalous stories about the club. So I think the Embassy Club was part of my community in a way. I met the assistant of the director, Mike Mansfield, the director of, you know, he used to do that TV show that pop something, and he'd point, take it away or something like that. His assistant, and Mike was directing the Adam and the Ant videos, and his assistant, Hilary, said to me one day, oh, we're shooting a new video this weekend for Adam at Hatfield House in Hertfordshire, and we need some extras. And you'll get 50 quid and you'll be fed and it'll be a fun day out. Are you up for it? And I was like, yeah, okay, we'll pick you up at 6 in the morning. The coach will pick you up at 6 in the morning. I mean, often at the nightclub, you know, I'll be getting home at 4 in the morning because the club closed at 3. But yeah, I did it. So I'm in Stand and Deliver, but if you blink, you miss me. But again, I was surrounded by all these artsy people on the set. And life is about, I hate to use the word networking, but life is about who you meet, and certain people can be really helpful.
Yeah.
And certain people can be a nightmare, but that's another story.
So, you know, let's talk about being in that video, because if you're, you know, and being in the Embassy Club and having, you know, I sort of read that, you know, people like Elton John would come in, there'd be a lot of different types of stars that would go to the Embassy. And, you know, you had won a singing competition when you were young. You knew you had talent. You knew you could sing. What was your view of what life would be like as a singer, as a pop star, when you were just sort of seeing them?
Yeah, I had that complete naive view that if you made it, you know, that's it. Life is perfect, which of course it isn't at all. It could almost bring more problems. I mean, as we see over and over again with celebrities and even royal families, darling, you know. But yeah, you know, I'm looking at glossy album covers of the Motown Chartbusters. I remember that was the prize for winning the singing contest at the Wigan Casino. And 10 albums of my own choice. It was just the most glorious prize. But I'm looking at these beautiful images created by Motown, their photographers and their stylists and their finishing school of Diana Ross and the Supremes. And they're all, you know, they're all beautifully lit in beautiful gowns and matching outfits and designer clothes and all the rest of it. And that's what success seemed to represent to me. And also life on TV. You know, TV seemed more interesting. It seemed colorful and glamorous and I don't know, life on the council estate just didn't seem to have any of that. Nobody was in the arts. Yeah. So it represented a lot.
No, I mean, I used to work in Manor. You probably remember. I don't know. I used to, you know, Manor, which was in Primrose Hill, the vegetarian
Oh my
restaurant.
God, yes, but I was vegetarian for years.
I know
Yeah.
you used to come in. I used to, well, I
Yeah.
started off washing up and then I was waiting. But, you know, a lot of people, you know, Boy George would go there, Bob Geldof, Midure, there'd be, you know, lots of different pop stars there. And I remember
Yeah.
being there, like washing up, wanting to try and get a job on TV. So for me, this was, in a way, the similar idea that I would see these people come in and imagine their lives and imagine how amazing it must be. And then, of course, finding out later it's all rather empty.
You know, they displayed that perfectly on TV the other night. They showed La La Land, and there's that great clip at the beginning where the actress, no, what's her name? The lead in La La Land. I can't think of her name.
Yeah, it's Gosling and I forgot her name as well, but carry on.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Remember Gosling?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was so great in that film. Perfect leading man in that film.
Oh, Emma Stone.
Thank you. Emma Stone is behind she's a barrister in the coffee bar on the lot, I think. It was on the film lot in Hollywood. And then, of course, at the end, after she's become the big star, she goes in to buy a coffee as the star. There's a general buzz and excitement that she's come in. And of course, she relates to what it was like when she was there. Yeah, I mean, these stories are so familiar. I was obsessed with the movie Alien because when I saw the first film at Leicester Square in 1978, was that? Or 7 or 9? I had a motorbike. I lived in Pimlico and I was so scared. After the film, I nearly fell off my bike going home. I was just so tense from the, anyway, so I bought the DVDs, I bought the extras, I read stuff. And the two writers of the movie, who've obviously done very well out of it since then, one of them had broken up with his girlfriend in Paris, two straight guys. So he rang his mate up, he got back to LA and he said, I've got nowhere to sleep, can I crash on your couch? And he said, yeah, but as long as we try and work on something. I said, okay. So they started writing Alien.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about going from the depths of despair. I love those stories. They're so inspiring.
So when, you know, you were in a couple of bands, weren't you? You were in Vox Deus and you were in Crossword, and then you answered this advert, I think in the Melody Maker, it would have been one of the Music Press magazines. And it was for a band that was then called Art Nouveau. Can you remember that audition and how, because you must have been incredibly nervous.
Are you kidding? I wasn't nervous.
Yeah, come
I
on.
swanned in there. No way. I was not nervous.
Oh, wow.
But first of all, it was my ad that they answered. So I had an ad in looking for musicians to form a band, separate musicians. I got a call from Nick, the bass player, and he said, hi, my name's Nick, we're in a band. He said, I know you're looking to form your own band. He said, we're already a band and we've been auditioning singers. We had an advert in, but we didn't find anyone. You want to come up? And I thought, well, nothing to lose. Jumped on a train to Leighton Buzzard. Nick met me at the station, drove me to the greeting card factory where the drummer worked, Jez. The boss had said, that we can rehearse on the factory floor after it closes at 6 because we're making lots of noise. And it was one of those business parks where it's pretty empty after 6. And they played two songs that they've written. And they were the right age. The key thing for me was they had this one monophonic synthesizer, which they played. I think the song was called Monochromatic. I think that was the song. It might have been Animal Instincts. Really interesting it was to me. And I just remember thinking, these guys have got something. And so I called my agent, Barry Stacey, on Charing Cross Road. Darling, you know, Barry was great character. Everything was darling. Sending you for an audition, darling. Barry got me my first professional stage role in Aladdin at the Grand Theatre in Swansea. And it was a lesbian singer that I met called Iris, who introduced me to Barry. I bumped into her in a pub in Hendon in North London. And she was there watching a female singer called Polly Perkins, who then later went into EastEnders and also El Dorado or something along those lines. I should write a book. This is crazy, isn't it? But see, I've gone off on a tangent now and I'll forget what I was saying. So what point was I up to?
Well, the type of music, you know, they had the keyboard that you were interested in. They had a song that you were fascinated by.
Yeah. So I called, yes. I really shouldn't go off-piste so much. So I called Barry Stacey, the agent. I said, Barry, I can't do any more auditions. I'm leaving London to go and live in a place called Leighton Buzzard. I'm joining a band. And I always laugh because he probably put the phone down and thought, that'd be the last we hear of him. Another one bites the dust, whatever. But thankfully, I was able to prove him wrong. So I lived in Leighton Buzzard with Nick and his girlfriend, Sue, at their council flat. It's quite a sweet town, Leighton Buzzard. I remember that high street. Me being artsy, I started convincing the band to play around with her image. And at one point, the guitarist, Steve, we did his hair green. And I think the other one had this red hair. We went to a local pub and literally everyone was looking at us. And I've got the blonde hair. They were looking at us like we're from another planet, aliens from another planet. The reaction was perfect. I just thought that was perfect, that we'd shocked them all, you know. The bigger the shock, the better.
And the Embassy Club came back into play in a sense because that's where you had met Nick Rhodes, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So again, I'm at work, the Embassy Club, and I serve a drink to Nick, and he's in there with manager Paul Barrow, very tall, handsome guy. They were the owners of the Rum Runner, him and his brother Mike, Paul and Mike Barrow, who went on to manage Duran. And I was just, you know, I served the drink, you know, they were sat down on a sofa. I put the drink down and we just got talking. And I think I'd bought the Duran album and I may have said that. I'm a fan, blah, blah, blah. I'm in a band. And we just done some demos, blah, blah, blah. And to my surprise, he just said, well, send me your tracks and I'll let you know what I think. And so he gave me an address and I sent him a cassette because that was the best way to get stuff around in those days. You know, it's just a little cassette in the post. A week later, he phoned me. I was living in Lancaster Gate. There was a horrible green plastic telephone on the wall of this rented flat, the second floor, third floor, with one of them really curly cables that was always tangled. And picked up the phone. It was a sunny day. I can picture it. And he said, hi Limahl, it's Nick. I got your tape, thank you. I like the songs. And I'm intently listening, hanging on every word. And he said, I'm going to take them into EMI Records and I'll let you know how I get on. And the rest, as they say, I mean, he went on to co-produce the the only album I made with Kajagoogoo, that debut album, with their producer, Colin Thurston, Duran's producer. And he helped to get us signed at EMI Records, who had previously turned us down 6 weeks before. I think about 6 of them, because there were a lot of record companies you could go to then. Polygram, Polydor, Mute, RCA, and others. Yeah, but yeah, quite a few had turned us down. And then, and including EMI. And then, so it was a shock really that we ended up being with EMI. So the old adage, it's not what you know.
What was the dynamic between you, between the Stuart, Steve, Nick, the guys in the band? Because I know later it turned a bit sour, but I just wondered the dynamic at the beginning and whether everyone had their input or whether they felt it was their band. I just wondered how that worked at the beginning.
I thought the dynamic was great, and I never felt like the outsider. I certainly wasn't aware of it. I consider the guys my family. That's why it was such a shock when they called and fired me. There was no discussion, no debate, no 3 strikes and you're out. I mean, there's artistic tension sometimes in all bands, about, and also about everything. You argue over, not argue, but there can be heated discussions about the publicity photo, the choice of the album cover, the title of the album, which single comes out first, which follows it. This is all, par for the course, really. So to me, nothing was wrong. That's why it was such a shock. I was like, we just come back from playing a big festival in Finland, huge festival, 40,000 people, probably on a par with Glastonbury or something. And they all knew that's what hurt. They all were being two-faced to me. They didn't want to tell me before that event because we could have got sued because a contract had been signed, etc., etc. So that just felt really deceitful, And now, of course, with hindsight, it was completely unnecessary. It was commercial suicide for them. And it will always be one of the what ifs in my life. What if we stayed together and made another album or two? I'll never know.
Don't go away. More of Limahl coming up in a second. First, though, please subscribe. Also, check out popthehistorymakers.com. You'll find all the interviews there. Okay, without further ado, let's get back to Limahl. One of the most amazing things is a band to release their first single and have a massive worldwide hit. And that must have changed your life overnight.
Yeah, unlike Motown, there was no finishing school where they would sit you down and tell you how to behave with the press and how to handle yourself at public events, etc., etc. You're just thrown in at the deep end. And it was a bit like Beatlemania for 6 months. We didn't see that coming. Looking back, I'm thinking, well, that was going to happen because we were just a bunch of cute 23-year-olds who looked about 18 anyway. And the conglomerate, EMI, they didn't care as long as they sold units. And I suppose in a way they tried to capitalize on that. It's not necessarily a bad thing to be a teeny idol in the beginning. I mean, if you look at Duran were teeny idols, the Beatles were teeny idols, Wham were teeny idols, and there's loads more. And your fans sort of grow up and you're growing up and you grow up together, you lose some fans, you gain some fans. It's the sort of natural cycle, really. The thing that bugs me is no one's ever apologized from the band. No one's ever told me how it came about, why it came about. I took Jez to lunch a couple of years ago and tried to get it out of him, but it just wasn't coming. I said, he sort of fumbled, he couldn't really remember and da-da-da. And I always felt that Jez was on my side because he got fired after me, the drummer. And, his times were difficult too. The 3 band members had got very Christian, and he was actually locked out of the dressing room after coming off stage by his own security. And he said, you can't go in. He said, why? He said, they're praying. So you can see how silly it got,
It was a very public firing, wasn't it?
I think it was very difficult for EMI because, when a record company have invested a lot of time and money and their whole team in a new project, and as we all know, just like in movies, they can throw shed loads of money at a movie. The movie costs a fortune, the marketing costs a fortune, and the movie flops. It happens in the music business too. It happens with books, anything creative. So for EMI to suddenly have this band explode, it must have been so exciting for them. And this is what I learned just before the reunion in 2008. This is the Kajagoogoo reunion. I had dinner with Paul Gambaccini, who had been very supportive of the band in the beginning, was partly, it was helpful in the success because he was talking about us at Radio 1. I had met Paul in the Heaven nightclub in London. Nightclubs come up again. The gay nightclub Heaven, mainly gay, owned by Richard Branson, strangely, who's not gay. But Paul's success was recognized with Too Shy. He was given an award disc by EMI, and he's thanked on the sleeve. A special thanks to PG, I think it says. But Paul told me in 2008 that at the time of the split, EMI actually rang him up and said, look, we've tried absolutely everything we can to keep the band together, and you're our last hope. And so Paul agreed to talk to everyone, and everyone agreed to not split except the bass player, Nick. And so really he's my is the word nemesis.
Yeah. I mean, in effect, though, the split, you went solo, and then, you made probably the most significant track in your career. I mean, I don't know about probably. I mean, it must be the most significant track in your career with Giorgio Moroder. Can you remember how that came about and your first sort of discussion with Moroder?
Of course, I can remember absolutely everything. That's the irony, isn't it? If Kajagoogoo hadn't fired me, would I have had the opportunity to do the Never-Ending Story, which, as you rightly say, has become even more important. The streams of Never-Ending Story compared to Too Shy are double. So we're at nearly 200 million of Never-Ending Story. It roughly streams about 2 million a month, and that will, I'm sure, increase. And I see it, let's talk money again. I see it in the royalties, they've far surpassed Too Shy. Too Shy, Never-Ending Story is just this, it just reaches and touches so many people. It's the strangest thing. It's just one of those things that you can't foresee. And of course, for which I'm very grateful. How it came about was, for my first solo single, EMI Records asked me to go to the Tokyo Music Festival in Japan, perform at the Budokan Hall to promote that song. I said yes. My new manager at the time, Billy Gaff, a real entrepreneurial, exuberant character, Irish guy. Is famous. His parties were infamous in Chelsea, and his home in Berkshire. I went to a couple of great parties there. He was friends with John Reed. He'd been with Rod Stewart through a lot of his heyday, early Rod Stewart, I Am Sailing and Do You Think I'm Sexy? So, he had some great stories and confidence and everything. Billy was marvelous. Impossible too, but marvelous. But he would shout at me and tell me in his Irish accent. Anyway, Billy comes to Tokyo with me. And while we're there, it's Billy who goes to dinner with Giorgio Moroder. And obviously, Billy can hold a great conversation with someone like Moroder. For listeners, viewers of this, getting a call from Giorgio Moroder to work with him, it would be like an actor getting a call from Steven Spielberg today. A legendary three-time Academy Award winner for Top Gun movie theme song, which is Berlin, You Take My Breath Away. Flashdance, What a Feeling, Irene Cara. And then I think the other one was Midnight Express, that disturbing film about the Turkish prison and drugs and things, where the Turkish were demonstrating in London outside of cinemas that were showing it. And of course, Giorgio went on to work with Freddie Mercury, Debbie Harry, David Bowie, just to name a few.
Yeah, and of course Donna Summer in that, being in Heaven nightclub, there was, Donna Summer, I Feel Love, non-stop.
I feel love changed everything.
Yeah.
That was just so groundbreaking. What would it be like? Yeah, I remember the first Matrix movie with all those amazing effects. It'd be, that recording is still exciting today. I can crank it up in the car and just, I'm 20 again. But what was we saying?
Well, it's just about
yes.
Billy Gaff met Giorgio Moroder, and then it obviously came to you.
So we get home, and Giorgio's office calls my manager and says, we'd like to try Limahl's voice on this new movie soundtrack. And of course I said yes. I flew to Munich to try my voice. That was an audition, really. I don't know what other singers he was trying, but I'm so glad he chose me. But the funny story about Neverending Vocal, Steve, is that being 24 the night before, I was out clubbing, smoking, drinking, got to bed at 4 a.m. The flight was at 9. I nearly missed it. Got to Munich. I couldn't sing a note. My voice wasn't, you could hear it. It was croaky, And I was very relaxed. I remember saying to Giorgio, I said, "Oh, I can't sing in the afternoon. Let's just have some food and stuff, and we'll get it this evening." And that's what happened. We had about 2 glasses of wine, a nice meal that the studio staff cooked, Musicland Studios, and where he'd done all the Donna Summer stuff. There was a charming German guy, manager there. What was his name? Anyway, I can hear his voice now. And about 8 p.m., vocal wasn't bad. I got home, I had a sort of a desk mix, not a final mix of the song. I remember putting it in my little JVC ghetto blaster and thinking, I wasn't sure, I wasn't sure. I thought, it's all right. But of course, this was an early mix. And of course, that's a very familiar story as well. When people say to me over the years, Well, you must have known it was going to be a hit. I didn't know if Too Shy was going to be a hit. I didn't know if Never Ending Story was going to be a hit. In the early 2000s, I worked with Gwen Dickey from the American band Rose, remember them?
I love Rolls-Royce. Yeah.
Yep. Wishing on a Star and, of course, Car Wash. Such a breakthrough track, that guitar and the... I said, well, and of course, we did a 9-month theatre tour, and so we had a lot of time, share stories and chat. And one day I said to her, I said, did you always think, did you know Car Wash was going to be this huge hit? And she goes, ha, honey. She's an American. She said, I went to the producer and I said, who's going to hear a song about washing cars? So there's so many stories like that. Never Ending Story is a huge surprise. It almost didn't happen. It almost didn't go in Stranger Things. Life can be like that, can't it? It can go one way or the other. It's crazy.
I also think, I mean, it's very unusual to have those, two massive worldwide hits. It's not unusual to have a period of enormous success and fame, and then a period where you're less known and people talk about a period before. And I remember that from MTV, when I left MTV, that for the next 10, 15 years, people would still identify me with MTV, or even longer, when I wasn't personally, I didn't feel I was the Steve Blame back then, as a different person and had different interests and all those things, until I finally sort of came to terms with my own past. Did you have a period like that of having to come to terms with it as well?
Well, the way I came to terms with it was, so my first solo album kind of did okay because Never Ending Story was on it. Only for Love did okay, the first single. That was like 500,000 units across Europe and the UK. Also went on the very first Now That's What I Call Music. My second album with Giorgio got lost in some sort of marketing experiment at EMI, and my A&R guy had left. And I was fed up because I was annoyed that I just felt that they didn't deliver their side of the bargain, after I'd worked so hard writing these songs and recording them with George and being with Giorgio Moroder. That album, the second solo album with EMI, was called Color All My Days. So I got off EMI. Then I fell out with Billy, or Billy fell out with me, my manager. I spent a good 2 to 3 years. I just thought, I'll get another deal. I'll get another deal. I spent 2 or 3 years writing, recording new demos, because that's what I do. In my mind, that's what I'm supposed to do in life now. I went off to America and I got signed by Clive Davis at Arista. Wow. It was so exciting. I remember I was at one of their functions in their offices, and literally 2 yards from me, I can overhear Whitney Houston talking to Anita Baker, and somebody was talking to me, and it was like whatever he was saying was just going over my head, because all I was doing was focusing on Whitney and Anita Baker, discussing lipstick and makeup and stuff and clothes. So then so getting signed to Clive Davis, this amazing mogul, they spent $200,000 because it was expensive to record back then, recording 6 songs. Then he dropped me. And they dropped me because he didn't like the first 2 recordings that I'd requested to work with these 2 Dutch producers, Eric Van Tijn and Jochen Floutsma, who'd done the Mai Tai hit in '86, which was a bit chic. History.
Yeah, I remember that.
Great song.
Yeah.
And they got ripped off by the UK distributor, but that's another story. By quite a lot of money, just disappeared. See, middlemen, avoid them. But I love their work. And so I said to Clive, well, come on, why don't you give these guys a chance? And it was one of those classic scenarios where we didn't need to better the demo. The demo that Clive got excited about should have been kept the same and just tweaked. We went off and tried to, change it and do this and do that. And yeah, it just lost its raw magic, the raw magic that was there. This is another common theme of demos. Sometimes the demo is better than than the master recording or the alleged master recording. When I got dropped by Arista, that was it. In my mind, this is answering your question. I'm out of the music business. I've had enough. I'm completely burnt out. And I just didn't do anything really for 2 or 3 years. And at that point, I did have to look back at where I had, my journey so far. And this is what helped me. I thought, well, am I only going to be happy as a person privately if I have a hit record? Because if I never have another hit record, that means I'm going to be unhappy for the rest of my life. That's a wasted life, So that was the trigger point for me, just sort of mentally coming up with that conclusion. And sure enough, 2 or 3 years later, I had loads of recording equipment. I started tinkering around, and I thought, okay, this is what I'll become. Like a footballer goes on to be a manager, or an actor that goes on to direct, I'll be a producer. And I rented a space in Shepherd's Bush with a keyboard player, friend of mine, Guy Fithian, and really talented musician. And for 5, 6, 7 years, we worked on mixes for Kim Wilde, Peter Andre. We worked with some DJs. Now, we never quite reached the success we wanted to, and things kind of fizzled out. But what is interesting is a lot of the skills that I learned in the studio from my time doing all those demos years ago, and the recordings with Kajagoogoo and the solo work, and then the studio work, is all, you hear all of that in my new track, A Horse with No Name, because that's my job.
Well, you did that beautifully because you tied it all together. And I love the point that you said that can you only be happy when you identify with this sort of massive success? And the answer is you can be happy if you're doing something that you love. And I think that is really beautiful statement. And I want to thank you, Limahl, and I want to thank you for your contribution to popular culture, because it is a big contribution. I mean, everyone knows everyone knows those hits, and they will forever be here. Up there is an interview I recommend. Down there is where you can find all the podcast interviews, and here is where you can connect.